Hello, I'm Kevin, and my 1002nd album is Wildflowers by Tom Petty. No heartbreakers.
Hi, I'm Jeff Stephen, and you're listening to the 1002nd Album Podcast. I spent 10 years going through the 1001 albums you must hear before you die, and now I'm asking people that are important to me all about the albums that are important to them. Enjoy! This is the 1002nd Album Podcast. I'm Jeff Stephen, and I'm particularly excited today because my guest, I think it's the most nicknames of any guest thus far, or alter egos. Goes by names like Canadian Grooves, Buried on Mars, involved in projects like Retro Fandango, and it's always a pleasure to chat with him. Please welcome Kevin Simister.
Oh, thank you for having me here, Jeff. It's a thrill to be here. I've been on the internet since 2012, and you add these names. They just
Exactly.
follow you. So
they just accumulate. I like
right.
it. Nice. And the album of choice today is Tom Petty's Wildflowers. And my first question for you would be, when did you and Tom Petty first cross paths, or when was your first dance with Tom Petty?
Well, it was Mary Jane's last dance. Actually, I was not a fan of Tom Petty in the 80s or the 70s or anything like that. Even when he came back for the revival in 89 with Full Moon Fever, that was when I was just getting into school, when I was first getting into high school in grade 9. And we had a jukebox in our cafeteria. And there was a girl, she was in a grade much older than me, so I couldn't confront her about this, but every day she would put Free Fallin' on that jukebox. And nothing gets you to hate a song more than being forced to listen to it every day at lunchtime. So I did not like Tom Petty at all. I was more into, ZZ Top, AC/DC, everything that was like passe by the early 90s. That's what I was into. But then I got a job at a gas station, and the owner insisted on having the radio on 24/7, and I never listened to the radio. So this was the first time I was being introduced to a whole bunch of like different kinds of music, and that I didn't like a majority of it. But this one song came on the radio, and it was Last Dance with Mary Jane, and I'm listening to it, and this guy is just it's a rock and roll song, but he's got like this southern drawl, so it kind of feels a little bit country, but he's telling this story about an Indiana girl in an Indiana town, and it sounds like very like a Chuck Berry kind of style lyrics. And it drew me in. And then I was floored when I found out later that it was Tom Petty. And I'm like, oh damn, I guess I like a Tom Petty song. So I went and I got myself Tom Petty's greatest hits, and just listen to it over and over and over again. And when Wildflowers was announced, this was about the summer of 93. Wildflowers came out in Christmas time. Gotta get those sales in for Christmas. Came out around that time. And it was the first time I bought an album that was like brand new, like it just came out. It was the first time that I was interested, like the whole concept of singles coming out like a year and a half after the album came out. It was like, oh, here's Tom Petty's new single. Oh, it's still from Wildflowers. That came out like 18 months ago, But yeah, so ever since then, I've been a Tom Petty fan ever since, and been championing this album. And it's a disgrace that it's not on the 1001 album. So
I like it. Nice. That's funny because I don't think he's one of those guys. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say anything like remotely negative about. So that's great that you weren't initially a fan, partially due to the jukebox incident.
oh yeah.
But that.
Oh, I live in Sudbury. I was born and raised in Sudbury. Sudbury's a metal town, and I can introduce you to a whole bunch of people that don't like Tom Petty, and they tell me that they don't like Tom Petty every time I tell them I do like Tom Petty. So
nice. But that I have that same the 93 greatest hits one, and
yeah, I love it.
Beautiful compilation for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And the so that makes for this one being an interesting point in his career, where if the greatest hits sort of summarizes the work up to 93, how does this 1994 album compare to the stuff that both came before and after?
Yeah, I kind of look at Tom Petty's. I kind of do this with almost every band, but I compare their careers to the Beatles, just because I don't know. It's just something that everybody knows. Everybody knows the Beatles and the albums that came out. So to me, like Tom Petty's 70s stuff is kind of like the early Beatles boy band stuff. Where it's just influenced on the rock and roll that they grew up with, and they're now performing that. And then when Full Moon Fever came out, to me, that's kind of like his Revolver or Sergeant Pepper's, where he is like coming out of that shell and he's becoming more of a songwriter. And that's the album that everybody loves, is Full Moon Fever. But the real Tom Petty fans are the ones that love the White Album even more. And that to me is Wildflowers. That's really taking everything that he has learned throughout his career, really slowing down in the studio, taking time to really develop songs that were better than anything he had done before.
And that may be why I like this album so much, because the White Album is my personal favorite album by
there
anyone
you go.
ever.
See, my analogy works. It's great.
You know your audience, which is good. Nice. And that point about taking time to work on it and develop it in the studio, this one I gather is significant for Rick Rubin, the producer, being involved as well, because he's of course got an incredible resume or CV. But from what I've read, his involvement sometimes ranges from like being absolutely essential to the sound to being sort of, well, he's on the list of credits, but he's sort of a producer in name only. And how integral was he to this particular album here?
Very much so. Like if there was a feather in Rick Rubin's cap, Wildflowers is it. He approached Tom Petty, saying like he wanted to produce a Tom Petty album. He actually it's that Hollywood thing where he approached the Tom Petty's people, and Tom Petty's people said, no, Tom Petty works with Jeff Lynne. He doesn't work with other producers. So you're out of luck, Rick Rubin. And then Tom Petty, like a couple of years later, said, you know what? I'd really like to work with a different producer other than Jeff Lynne. And somebody said, well, why not Rick Rubin? And then Rick Rubin's like, what, you guys told me you didn't want to work with me, now you do. It's just, but yeah, that's the way it goes sometimes. But yeah, he was absolutely integral to this album. Basically he gave Tom Petty, like, if you look at those Jeff Lynne albums, and I'm talking like the ones that came out just before this one, Jeff Lynne was a very get the recording and from each instrument separately, and then put it together. That's the way albums were kind of mostly made around this period of time, because you wanted everything to sound perfect. He had like a real pop sensibility about his production, like the guitars on those albums. If there's some criticism, even though I think they are great albums, they're great pop records, they don't really feel like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers playing instruments together. They kind of feel like as if they're like this music that's arranged to sell records kind of thing. I'm getting too too much in the weeds, but really with Wildflowers, basically Rick Rubin has this ability to get what artists do best and get them to recreate them on new albums. And I think that's a part of that is because he is not a musician, right? He is basically a fan. And they kind of like, these musicians kind of respect him in that way, because he's just able to relate to them as a fan. He's like, you know what, I really like what you did here on Damn the Torpedoes. So I'm really a fan of what you did here on Free Fallin' or on Full Moon Fever. And he gets them to kind of recreate that. But he also let them like record all in a studio together. They didn't have to record everything separately. So they really appreciated that. I'll give you something specific for a song like that he really influenced. You take, for instance, the hit from this album is what the heck's the name of it? I'm really bad with names.
You Don't Know How It Feels?
You Don't Know How It Feels. Thank you. So You Don't Know How It Feels. If you listen to that song, the drums in that song are very upfront. And that, you almost said yep there. And that, that is something that I think harkens to his, hip hop sensibility. Like he produced a lot of hip hop albums before this. And so he brought those drums like really up front, and they're real simple. They're not anything fancy, right? It's just like if you're learning how to play drums and you want to just learn 2 grooves, that's the song to learn on, because it's just those 2 grooves over and over again, and you'll get some sort of sense of rhythm. So I think that's really something that's something that Jeff Lynne wouldn't do. Nothing against Jeff Lynne. He's an awesome producer. The albums he produced with Tom Petty are awesome, but it's just different.
For sure. And that's it exactly. And when you said the drums right in the front, still like simple drums right in the front, I immediately thought of Rubin's work with the Beastie Boys, where
Yeah,
licensed
exactly.
still just with the giant drums right off the top, just to
Yep.
yeah. But again, simple yet super effective.
And you have never heard anything like that on a Tom Petty record before. That was very unique to that album.
And there's something to be said too, where if you're building a song up track by track, you might get it to sound, like you said, perfect, or sound like it's, really well constructed or that sort of thing. But you might have the risk of losing some of the energy that you'd get with just having the people in the room together. So I could
Yes.
see how this one, the musicians would have enjoyed that, just the recording off the floor, being together recording, because you get a certain level of energy you can't get
Yeah,
isolated.
like for instance, a lot of the songs they would when they were working them out, they did not record them to a click track. They instead would get the drummer to do a physical, just a simple beat on a hi-hat or something like that, just to get that human swing to the beat, right? And that's why this album, I think, I kind of hate using this word, but it's a word that everybody understands, so I use it. It's organic, instead of that cold digital feel.
So it's the human click track rather than the digital one.
Exactly. And you think it's something that would make a difference, but it does come through on the record.
And that's what I find, I guess, is somewhat ironic then, if that this is the one where the guys are all playing together. Like you said in the title, it's Tom Petty Wildflowers rather than Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers Wildflowers. And so but I guess it's them playing though, is it not? In the
It is for the most part. I'm gonna the way to describe this album perfectly, and I'm gonna paraphrase Tom himself with this, is he says, "Wildflowers is the solo album with the band." So basically, he was having trouble with the Heartbreakers. They were not all getting along. I think part of it might have been his work with the Wilburys in the late 80s, where Tom was kind of exposed to the way it can be in a recording session, and that with people working together instead of like a democracy where they all had to agree on things and all that. And if we could be honest, those albums from the mid 80s that he did with the Heartbreakers were kind of weak. They had a few hits, but they were weaker, and they were a little bit diminishing returns. And that's really why on Full Moon Fever, that's why he wanted to do the album on his own, right? That was his debut solo album. And he was like, I just want to be the dictator. I want it the way I want it, kind of thing. And, it opened it up to writing different styles, different ways, and all that. So he did go back to the Heartbreakers for one more like the traditional Heartbreakers, for one more album with Into the Great Wide Open, which did okay. But then with this album, again, he was feeling very prolific. He was writing a lot of songs. A lot of them were really good. This album, I don't know if you know, but this album was originally supposed to be a double album, because he had so many songs that he wanted to record. And he wanted to record them in his way. He wanted to do like different things and that. And there is a little bit of a different flair on this one, a little different flavor from, like, he would be restricted. There are things that he did on this album that he wouldn't be able to do with Heartbreakers. There are songs that are flat out Heartbreaker songs. Like I think Cabin Down the Road and Honeybee, they come close, but You Wreck Me, that is like 1970s Heartbreakers.
Yeah.
Like 100%. There is nothing like that is a Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers song. But then there's other songs, like Wildflowers itself. That is a very, singer-songwriter song. And that's really the vibe that he wanted. He wanted to do like a singer-songwriter album. And I think he succeeded with that, with a lot of the songs on this almost double album.
And it's funny, I scribbled down for You Wreck Me. I was like, this feels like a not too distant a cousin from Running Down a Dream or that sort of thing.
It's 100% a Heartbreaker song. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
Which I've always got the time to hear, which is good. You mentioned a couple of them there. Are there certain ones, so of the 15 that ended up making it onto the single album, are there certain tunes in particular that jump out at you?
Oh, goodness, we could be here all day. Well, I love all 15. I will say, if I do have a criticism with the album, is that it is a little too long. It is a very long album. Honestly, though, every album in the 90s, almost every album in the 90s was too long, because they had this new CD format where they can fit a lot more music on it. Originally, this was supposed to be a double. He brought it to the record company as a double, and the record company insisted that it only be a single. He had so many good songs that it was all like he took 3 months to whittle this down to one CD. One of the songs he had to cut featured Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys and Ringo Starr on drums. Can you imagine you have that many good songs that you're going to cancel out a Beach Boy and a Beatle? Like that just that blows my mind. So yeah, if you want to like standout tracks, I love the song Wildflowers. That song is like, if you're listening to it on the surface, that song just sounds like it's Tom Petty and the acoustic guitar. But if you really listen to it, you put on the headphones and you really listen to that song, there's so much going on in there that actually enhances that song. I mean, Tom Petty plays the French horn in that song. It's just buried in the mix. It's down back in there, but it's there. If you listen for it, there is a French horn in that song. I love It's Good to Be King. It's Hard to Find a Friend. Like a lot of these songs too, like he was going through, he's actually thinking about divorcing his wife. So that's why a lot of the songs are kind of moody in a way, because he's trying to wrestle with that, and he was going through therapy for the first time, so a lot of that was coming through on the lyrics as well. So one of my favorite lyrics on the album, it's a song called "Crawling Back to You." I almost want to get this tattooed on my arm. Not the first part, but the second part. So the first part is, "I'm so tired of being tired, sure as night will follow day," and this is the part I want to tattoo on my arm. "Most things I worry about never happen anyway." And isn't that true? Like most things that we worry about never happen anyway. And that to me is like, that's Tom talking to his therapist right there.
Right. Most things I worry about never happen anyway. I like that. Yeah.
It's true.
It's it's neat because whereas like you said, there were some heartbreakers moments. There was other things that didn't strike me as Tom Petty business as usual at all. Like you mentioned, It's Good to Be King. There was such a big sound in that one, almost like an orchestra going on or that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, he had Michael Kamen come in. Yeah. I don't know if he did S&M with Metallica. Might not have been him, but I know he did the soundtrack to Last Action Hero, which was a very heavy metal soundtrack. So yeah, like a lot of that stuff that like the Beatles were doing in the studio for the White Album, another connection right there. So there you go. Like it's it all ties together.
For sure.
For the White Album.
For sure. And it's funny, when I got to Only a Broken Heart, it felt a little Rocky Raccoonish with the chord progression, which is again one of the big standouts for me on the White Album too. So no complaints here, that's for sure.
Yeah, there you go.
Nice. I guess overall, is there of course there are 15 reasons here and many more that didn't make it on the list, but would there be a sort of a summary argument as to why this should be the 1,000-second album that one must hear?
It's weird because I could have went 1,000 different directions. I got a problem with that 1,001 list. There's a lot of things that are wrong with it. First of all, there's no Chuck Berry albums on it.
Right.
How does that happen? And then, so I thinking, well, maybe they think Chuck Berry's a little more singles guy than an album guy, but you listen to those first 3 Chuck Berry albums, they're awesome. So then I went and I looked a little further, and there's 2 red flags for me, for any list or anything. Number 1, they had no Phil Collins with Genesis or solo. Number 2, they had no Hall & Oates. So that leads me to believe that this list was written by elitists. Or if we want to get more crass, they were written by music snobs, because music snobs will not give those 2 guys, that band and Phil Collins, any credit anytime. I could kind of like say to myself, okay, well, they're music snobs, or maybe they think that they're singles. So I could kind of see why they didn't include that. But this album should be right up their alley. It should be, the people who put 8 David Bowie albums on their list should also enjoy this album, because it's the kind of album that you can sit and listen to in your room. You don't have to go to a show. You don't have to put on the radio, go to a dance club or anything like that the people who write about music don't like to do. They like to sit in their room and type out how their music opinion is better than everyone else's. And that is what this album is. It's an album for them. And it just really, I found it really curious as to why they didn't choose it. Because there's only 1 Tom Petty album on the entire list, and it's just the debut album. And I thought for sure there would be at least 5. I thought for sure that the debut, Damn the Torpedoes, Full Moon Fever, Wildflowers, and another good one that I can't think of right now. I thought for sure that would happen, but here we are. So that's why I think it deserves to be on there, because it's right up their alley.
I definitely think this is definitely worthy, and it's funny. It's maybe just as well we didn't talk until now, because a week or so ago, one of the Kingston record shops had this flash sale where it was 20% off for the day, and they had a version of this, but it was I guess, was it alternate takes of the songs? There's a special edition, I think.
Okay, so the album was originally supposed to be 2 discs, right?
Yeah.
And the record studio said, no, we only want 1 disc. So Tom Petty had to basically scrap all these songs. Some of them did end up on the She's the One soundtrack that followed this, but he kind of he admits that he screwed up in how they were produced, because he produced them himself, right? He didn't do it with Rick Rubin. So back in 2017, what he was doing was he was actually repackaging Wildflowers to put it out as the double disc album that he originally wanted it as. And then he passed away while he was doing this, while he was working on it. So it was then finished by Mike Campbell of the Heartbreakers and Rick Rubin and Simon Trench. There was a bunch of different people, but basically the family put it out. So there are several different versions of the album now, but that double one it's just like the regular album, then the songs are everything. So it's like Wildflowers and all the rest, or something like that.
Yeah.
And the rest.
But had we have spoken before the sale, I have a feeling I might have clicked on it to add it to the cart, and so I guess it would have been a good investment, but would have been a few dollars less in the wallet.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many different versions of it, because when it did come out, there was like a 5-disc version that was like really super expensive.
Yes.
And it was way too much, but I wanted those songs. So I ended up only getting the CD version instead of the vinyl version. And then the extra disc came on sale, and I'm like, well, I can have those songs on vinyl. So I ended up buying those songs on vinyl. And then enough fans complained that those extra songs were on the super expensive set. So then they just released the one album. So I could have brought it all and showed you, but I know this isn't a visual podcast, but I swear I got like 5 different versions of this album now. And I survived with just the CD copy up until 2020.
Yeah.
And now I have, I got like 4 other different versions of it, but they're all great songs. It's all good stuff.
Nice. And like you said, there should have been at least 5 Tom Petty songs on or albums on the 1001 list.
Yes.
There should be at least 5 versions of Wildflowers in your collection as well.
There you go. It all comes together. I'm sure there's 5 different versions of the White Album if you look hard enough. So
I love it. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for chatting today, Kevin. And until the next time.
All right. Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Take care. This has been the 1000-Second Album Podcast. Thanks for sharing some of your time, energy, and attention with us today. Take care.